much. Welcome to my channel. If you are new here, thank you so much for stopping by. I do videos on all sorts of topics, ranging from natural living to neurodiversity, autism, and giftedness, and ADHD, to chronic health issues like I am going to be talking about this video with my Ehlers Danlos Syndrome, and talking just about parenting. We homeschool, so if any of those things are of interest to you, definitely consider subscribing and hitting the little bell down below so that you can get a notification when I put up a new video. So right now I am recovering from surgery. If you want to know all the details about why I'm recovering from surgery, I will link that video right here. But I thought while I am sitting here convalescing, I might as well do some YouTube videos. So this is a video that I've been wanting to do for over a year because I have had this diagnosis for over a year, and it's something that I want to talk about more and make more of a main part of my channel, just because it's such a main part of my life. And I have found other people's channels that talk about Ehlers Danlos Syndrome to be so useful for me in understanding this condition and ways that I can cope with it and manage it and that kind of thing. Overall, this video is just going to be an introduction to how I got my diagnosis, what it is, that kind of thing. But I will probably make videos down the road talking more about the sub-conditions that I have because of my Ehlers Danlos Syndrome. But I will just touch briefly on those today. So first of all, let's just cover what Ehlers Danlos Syndrome is, just so we can know what we're talking about when I talk about my symptoms. It is a connective tissue disorder. Your connective tissue surrounds every single part of your body. It is basically the glue that holds every part of your body together. Like your tendons and ligaments are made out of connective tissue. There's connective tissue holding your organs in place. All of the different systems are stuck together with your connective tissue, so it is everywhere, and it is a really important part of your body. And so when you have faulty connective tissue, it can cause problems because connective tissue is literally in every single part of your body. So it can lead to different kinds of symptoms in pretty much any system in your body, depending on what type you have and just depending on how it happens to affect your body. I can't even remember how many types there are. I want to say like 9 types or something like that now. Most of the types are really rare, but they have genetically pinpointed those types, so you can get a genetic test and see if you have any of the more rare types. The most common of the rare types is the vascular Ehlers Danlos Syndrome, and that's actually the most dangerous kind of EDS as well, because it affects the connective tissue of your vascular system. So it can lead to like heart problems and tearing of blood vessels and things like that, which you can see why that would be a massive problem. So that's definitely the most dangerous type. However, the most common type of Ehlers Danlos Syndrome is the hypermobile type, and that is the type that I have. Like most of the vast majority of people who have EDS, most of us have the hypermobile type. Now, they don't have a genetic marker for the hypermobile type yet. They are searching for one actively right now, but they have not found it yet. Or it might be a cluster of different genes, but there currently is not a genetic test that you can take to pinpoint hypermobile Ehlers Danlos Syndrome. So it is what they call a clinical diagnosis, where a doctor takes a look at all of your signs and symptoms and uses a diagnostic criteria to make that call if you get that diagnosis. A signature sign of EDS is hypermobile joints, what back in the day they called double jointed. So that is something that I didn't even realize that I was. Like, I remember knowing people when I was younger that were even more double jointed than I was, and they probably have Ehlers Danlos Syndrome too, now that I think about it. But I remember thinking at the time, no, I'm not double jointed. But then once I looked at pictures of what hypermobile joints actually look like, if you can see, my elbow goes past 180 degrees there, and it actually goes back that way. Same with my knees. I'll actually insert a couple of pictures here of my hypermobile joints. And I've always been very flexible, very bendy. You know, I did gymnastics when I was a kid, and I remember like friends and family members saying, you're just so flexible, you're so flexible, which now I know the reason why. So basically, the faulty connective tissue makes your joints lax or loose, which is why you get hypermobile joints. And along with that, as you can imagine, it comes with a lot of chronic pain, which is the other signature thing of Ehlers Danlos Syndrome, is chronic pain in all different parts of your body. So a lot of chronic joint pain in particular, and a lot of dislocations. A lot of people with Ehlers Danlos Syndrome are prone to dislocations, which thankfully I don't have it so severe that I dislocate very easily. I don't know if I have ever actually fully dislocated. I've subluxed a lot of my joints, which means like a partial dislocation. Like I can even do that like with some of my finger joints. I can like partially pull them out of joint, which is kind of gross, but I obviously don't do that on purpose very much, because that causes a lot of pain. But that can be another telltale sign for a lot of people if they dislocate their joints easily. So that's kind of how it affects you in a musculoskeletal kind of way. And there are some comorbid conditions or conditions that happen very frequently along with Ehlers Danlos Syndrome, which is most likely due to the faulty connective tissue and other systems in your body. So one of those conditions is called POTS, which stands for Postural Orthostatic Tachycardia Syndrome. And basically that is fancy medical jargon for you feel like you're going to faint when you stand up. That's basically what it is. And that probably happens to everybody occasionally sometimes, but when you have POTS, it happens on a regular basis because the connective tissue in your blood vessels is lax. And so your blood vessels are kind of a little more squishy than they should be. I guess that's the best way to describe it. And they don't contract hard enough. There's not enough, they're not like rigid enough to squeeze the blood back up to your brain when you stand up, basically. And so if you're sitting down or laying down and then you stand up, you suddenly feel like you're going to faint because all of the blood is still in the lower part of your body. And most people with proper connective tissue, your blood vessels constrict immediately and bring the blood to your brain, and it's not an issue. So that's another common comorbidity with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. Another one is mast cell activation syndrome. So mast cells are part of your immune system, and I've learned that the reason why this is such a common issue among people with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome and connective tissue disorders is because the mast cells literally live in your connective tissue. So when you have issues with your connective tissue, it like literally physically affects your mast cells and makes them function not the right way. So basically it can lead to immune issues, like almost autoimmune type issues, a lot of allergy kind of problems. Some people have it so severe that they are prone to anaphylaxis. A lot of people with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome have anaphylaxis. Thankfully, that is also not something I have, but I have always had allergy problems. Mast cells release histamine, which leads to itching and inflammation. And so I have always had issues related to that throughout my life. And it can also lead to like food sensitivity issues. So that is another thing that I have dealt with. So that is another really common comorbidity. So those are the really main ones. Like I said, I am just doing an overview in this video. This is not an exhaustive list. I will talk a lot more in detail in other videos down the line about each of these comorbidities and how they're related to EDS and how they affect me and that kind of thing. But for the sake of this video, that's just kind of an overview of the main key points of what Ehlers Danlos Syndrome is. Interestingly, a lot of people receive a fibromyalgia diagnosis before they realize that they have Ehlers Danlos Syndrome. So my educated but non-professional opinion is that a lot of fibromyalgia cases are actually Ehlers Danlos Syndrome cases. And as a side note, when I had my surgery last week, one of my nurses there, he said part of his PhD was actually talking about connective tissue issues. And so I was like, what? That is so cool. And so he was like on board with my theory. I was like, yeah, I think a lot of fibromyalgia cases are actually connective tissue disorders. He's like, I think you're right. So my educated opinion might actually have something to it. Who knows? But anyway, so that's what Ehlers Danlos Syndrome is. Now down the road, I probably will make a video too talking about my whole history of my symptoms in childhood, symptoms in adolescence, things like that. There's just so much to talk about that I can't do it all in this video. But I will talk briefly, just a brief history of my life and how it has affected me in my life. I have my entire life had chronic pain, even when I was a child. And when I was a kid, I didn't even realize that wasn't normal. Like, it hurt my back to carry a backpack at school. And even in elementary school, later elementary school is when I really started noticing it. But I remember even like 5th, 6th, 7th grade, something like that, I would come home and I would have to lie flat on a hard floor to relieve the back pain that I had just from carrying a backpack. And this was before even high school, when they made us carry so many books, heavy books in high school, which made it even worse then too. But even before that, when I didn't even have that heavy of a backpack, I had chronic back pain, which I didn't realize is not normal for, you know, a 9, 10, 11, 12-year-old. So that was something that I experienced in my childhood. Another thing that I had in my childhood was constant stomach problems, and throughout adulthood. I basically my entire life have struggled with on and off nausea. I have had times in my life where it's worse than others, but basically at some point in the day, on most days, until recently when I have found some solutions, I basically would have some point in the day when I felt nauseated, and I thought that was normal too. Not normal to feel nauseated all the time, every day. I also realized later that some of that was relieved with eliminating certain foods from my diet. I found out that I have food sensitivities. I kind of figured that out when I was in my early 20s. I have been on a gluten-free, dairy-free, legume-free diet for quite a few years now. So that's actually an indicator of MCAS. Mast cell activation syndrome is all those food sensitivities that I've had all these years. Another digestive problem that I think I have a very mild version of is gastroparesis, and just a very slow moving digestive system in general. Some people with EDS have gastroparesis so severely that they have to get like a feeding tube. Thankfully, mine is not that severe. I am now on a medication that helps me quite a bit in terms of your stomach moving slowly and your intestines moving slowly, which can cause constipation pretty severely, things like that. That is another problem I have had my entire life. So I've had like the nausea and the like chronic constipation my entire life. So another MCAS thing I had in my childhood was I used to get hives all the time when I was a kid, and I had the worst hay fever when I was a kid, worst allergies. I had to take allergy medicine all throughout my childhood, which interestingly enough is a histamine blocker, which is related to mast cell stuff, since mast cells produce histamine. So I had the worst allergies. I remember going and getting the like skin prick test when I was a kid, and my arm was just like covered in bumps of all these things I was allergic to. Thankfully, I have never had like full up anaphylaxis. I am so thankful for that. Some people with EDS do struggle with anaphylaxis and have to carry an EpiPen and everything. So thankfully, my allergies are not that severe. But I have had, I guess you could call mild anaphylaxis, where I've eaten something once in a while where my tongue will feel kind of swollen, but it doesn't affect my breathing or anything. I'll just take some Benadryl and it goes down. But it is definitely the same kind of immune, histamine, inflammatory kind of process. So that is something I have struggled with my entire life as well. Being allergic to things outside, animals, things like that. Another thing I've had my whole life, like I mentioned in the overview, is POTS, the syndrome where you feel like you're going to faint when you stand up. And along with that comes with a lifetime of low blood pressure, which is better than having high blood pressure, I guess. But even now, well into my 30s, I'm almost 37 now, I have very low blood pressure. And they always comment on that when I'm at the doctor. Oh, your blood pressure is so low, it's so good. Which for the most part is a good thing. But it has also led me to feel faint a lot of the time. There are times when I would stand up and I have to sit right back down again because I feel like I'm going to black out if I don't, and I have to put my head between my legs. Heat can set it off as well. I remember there were times when I did swim team when I was a kid, and we would all go and sit in the hot tub afterwards, and I remember getting out from the hot tub and trying to walk and like staggering and almost blacking out because I almost fainted. And that happened on more than one occasion. That actually happened quite often after just taking hot showers as well. And that's another symptom of POTS. So I actually have gotten that somewhat under control as well. I think I need to do a video of the things that I have done since I've gotten my diagnosis, because I know that's what's going on. I have been able to find some treatments, sometimes very simple things to make all these things better, but I'll save that for another video. But yeah, that was something that I always struggled with as a kid, and well into adulthood. And I also, interestingly, I have struggled with anxiety my whole life. I also have ADHD, which I'll make another video about. So the anxiety is related to that as well, but the physical manifestation of my anxiety is that I would get POTS syndrome. Whenever I would get really severe anxiety, I would feel like I was going to faint. Like if I was having a panic attack, it was like I would feel like I was going to faint. If I didn't lay down, I would feel nauseous, feel like I was going to throw up, pass out. So that's something that I have been dealing with the vast majority of my life as well. And then just the chronic pain issue. I have always, since I was a kid, have some sort of joint that hurts. Like I said, when I was younger, I had like the back pain, but I would also, especially when I got into adulthood, I was really prone to getting tendinitis all the time in various different joints. And then when I got pregnant, it got even worse. One way I like to describe the experience of EDS is like when you have relaxin in your body when you're pregnant that make your joints kind of loose. That's what it's like all the time. So when you have EDS and you're actually pregnant and you have the relaxin on top of that, it makes your joints really loose. So definitely joints subluxing, which means like partial dislocation. I had that happen a lot. Thankfully, I have never had a full dislocation. Thankfully, my EDS is not so severe that that happens to me, so I feel very fortunate in that regard. But during and after pregnancy, and since, even though I am 3 years done with being pregnant now, my youngest is 3, I still almost always have some joint that is giving me some sort of tendinosis or tendinitis problem. when I was pregnant with Teo, my third, I was doing a workout at one point, and I was just using hand weights, and that was enough to sublux my right shoulder just enough that it caused a massive amount of pain. And that pain in my shoulder didn't go away until like almost a year and a half after I gave birth, and I ended up having to do physical therapy and things like that to get it better. So currently, right now, I have plantar fasciitis, and I've had that for nearly a year as well. Even going to see a podiatrist about it, it's still causing me a lot of problems. So there's always some joint in my body that is experiencing tendinitis or pain of some kind. And that has definitely been something that has been an issue for me all the way along. I have mentioned in other videos, but I used to be a massage therapist. And so I'm thinking now that's one of the reasons I was so drawn to body work and massage therapy, was because it was so therapeutic for my poor body and all of my pain that I constantly had. And basically, when you have loose joints and the connective tissue in your ligaments is really loose, your muscles seize up around those joints to protect your joints so that they don't dislocate and sublux and things like that. So, you know, my body is just full of knots all over the place. And thinking about that, that's probably one of the reasons I was so attracted to massage at the time, because massage does greatly help manage my pain. Another pain in a joint that I didn't know was until later was because of EDS was costochondritis, which is the sternocostal joint, which is where your ribs meet your sternum, right in the middle there. I've always been prone to having pain there, and I remember one of the first times I experienced it, this was before I had kids actually. I remember having like severe pain, and I remember thinking like, I'm having chest pain, that's not good, because it was like pretty severe pain. And I remember, of course, calling the consulting nurse, and of course when a consulting nurse hears chest pain, they say go to the ER. So I remember Bill taking me to the ER when that happened, and them saying, if you can move and that makes it hurt more, it's not your heart, it's musculoskeletal. So I remember thinking at the time, well, geez, I wish they could have told me that over the phone. But anyway, at least I knew that's what it was afterwards, that it wasn't an emergency situation. It wasn't my heart. It was basically just having tendinitis in that sternocostal joint. And it's happened several times since where I get like a severe pain in there when I move. Usually it's like when I twist or like bend forward. When it happens, when it flares, that's what causes it. But now I know what's causing it, and I know it's not an emergency. I know I'm not having a heart attack, and I just take some ibuprofen or something, and that will help it feel better. But that's something that I've had like on and off, is pain in that joint. So what was it that led me to seek out an Ehlers Danlos Syndrome diagnosis? I was actually watching a fellow YouTuber who was talking about her experience with Ehlers Danlos Syndrome. It was just a video that I happened to come across a few weeks before I went to go see my urogynecologist, because I had a severe uterine prolapse. Which, if you want to see, that's why I'm in bed right now, because I am recovering from having a hysterectomy. I have that whole story I will link in the cards. But me, after having 3 large-headed babies and an unknown connective tissue disorder, led me to have a 3rd to 4th degree uterine prolapse. And that's actually one of the diagnostic criteria, is if you have organ prolapse. I had just so happened to watch this video of this YouTuber talking about her experience with Ehlers Danlos Syndrome, and I hadn't even heard of it before I watched her video, and when she was talking about it, I was like, this all sounds like me. And then it just so happened that a few weeks later I went to have my consultation with my urogynecologist about my prolapse issue, and they're like, this is really unusually severe for someone your age. We really might be looking at a connective tissue disorder here. And so they were like, maybe even bordering on Ehlers Danlos Syndrome. And so I was like, ding, I just watched a video about that the other week. That's so funny. Maybe it was a God thing or something. So this highly specialized doctor was even bringing this up. And so after that appointment, I went home and I started researching Ehlers Danlos Syndrome. And I was like, oh my word. This explains every single health issue I have had in my entire life. And it was like all of these light bulbs were going off in my head, and it started to make so much sense. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I think I have EDS. So I then researched the diagnostic criteria and how I would even go about getting a diagnosis. You can either go through like a rheumatologist, or you can go through your primary care physician. Thankfully, the primary care physician I had at the time was a nurse practitioner, and she was amazing. She was absolutely amazing. She was so good at patient care and really listening and believing what is wrong with you, because oftentimes people with Ehlers Danlos Syndrome are brushed off by their doctors. People believing that they're just hypochondriacs and overreacting, or it's all in your head, or whatever ridiculous thing. But when I brought this to my doctor, she took me very seriously, and I had actually gone through, on the Ehlers Danlos Society website, you can print off the diagnostic criteria, and basically on my own, I had gone through every single one to see if I met the criteria, and I did. And so I brought this piece of paper to her and went over it with her, and she's like, yeah, I think you are absolutely right. I think that this is what you have going on. And she said, why don't we just have you take the genetic test to rule out the more rare types? And then if you don't have those types, then I will give you a diagnosis of hypermobile Ehlers Danlos Syndrome. So that's what I did. I went and had the genetic test done for all the other types, which I don't have. So ruling that out and ruling out other inflammatory conditions like lupus, things like that, which I don't have, that could contribute to similar kinds of symptoms that were ruled out. She gave me that diagnosis. So thankfully, it was a fairly easy road for me, and I had a really supportive doctor who was willing to go through all of that with me and take me seriously. So I feel very fortunate, because I know there's a lot of people who don't have such a smooth experience with that. So that's how I got my diagnosis, and since then I've just been researching the heck out of it and learning so much, just watching YouTube videos, reading articles, and basically my whole life in terms of my medical history makes total sense now. Basically my entire medical history and life of all of these symptoms of stuff that I didn't even realize indicated something. It was just all throughout my life, I just had one health issue after another, and I thought, like, I'm just this medical anomaly. I just have this weird stuff that goes on. And oh, that reminds me of one other thing that I had. In my early 20s, I had a condition called lichen planus, which I know now was most likely due to mast cell activation syndrome, causing an inflammatory process, but basically caused me to lose half of my toenails. And I started to lose my fingernails, but thankfully they got me on a very strong steroid and stopped the process and were able to preserve my fingernails. Thankfully, that was another thing, weird medical anomaly thing that happened to me when I was younger. I've always talked to my husband, I feel like I'm just this weird medical anomaly. Like, I have all these weird things that happen to me that are unusual and strange, and like, these things are not normal, are they? And just things like that throughout my life, or things that I thought were normal for me, but then I talk to other people and they're like, no, that's not normal. And I'm like, oh, okay, I guess it's not normal to feel nauseated all the time, or it's not normal to be in pain all the time. So it just made so much sense, and it's given me so much peace to know that there's a reason for it all. So that is my story. That is how I came to getting an Ehlers Danlos Syndrome diagnosis and where I am today. And like I said, I plan on making a lot more videos on this topic because there's just so much to say. Because like I said, connective tissue affects so many aspects of your body. And just in terms of the genetics of it as well, and how I can see some of these traits being passed on to my kids already as well. things like that. There's so much to talk about. So expect more videos from me talking about Ehlers Danlos Syndrome. So thank you guys so much for watching this video and listening to my story. I like to be an open book about these things, not for seeking sympathy or anything like that, but just because I want other people to know that they're not alone in their experience. They're starting to realize that it's a lot more common than they previously thought. I found videos on YouTube of people talking about their experiences, and it helped me figure out what was going on with my own body. And so that's why I'm putting this stuff out there, just because I hope it might be helpful for somebody, and otherwise just raising awareness about it so that people are more aware of it. So that is my story. Thank you guys so much for watching, and if you are interested in hearing more videos on this kind of topic as well as all the other stuff I mentioned at the beginning, we are a very eclectic channel here, definitely consider subscribing, and I will see you in the next video. Bye guys.